with Zain Hussain. With me today is a good friend, Daisy Abboudi. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. I hope your journey went well today. I understand you travelled from quite far. So today I wanted to speak with Daisy Abboudi about something quite interesting and something that a lot of people who are listening in might not know a lot about. That is the Jews from the Middle East who are in the UK. Daisy Abboudi from Tales of Jewish Sudan. Tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into Tales of Jewish Sudan. What is it and how you got into it?
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me. So I was born here in the UK, in London, in South London. And my grandparents came from Sudan, all four of them.
Okay.
My maternal grandmother, my dad's mum, was born in Egypt, but her mum was born in Sudan, and she came back to Sudan when she was 14. So all the rest are from Sudan. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I grew up here. I went to university. I did ancient history at university, so Greeks and Romans, and then I did my master's in the same thing. And after I finished my master's, I didn't really know what to do, and I was working these not very interesting jobs that were leading nowhere. So I decided to quit and for 6 months interview some people from the community and collect their recipes. That's how I started, because I thought I was kind of interested in cooking, and I was like, okay, I'll just do that. And then 3 years later, it morphed into this massive oral history project, and now I do cookery workshops, and it's become a big thing and has led on to other really interesting things as well. So hopefully I'm working on a book eventually. Haven't finished even the manuscript yet, but hopefully that's where it will lead as well. So.
No, and I've taken a look at the website Tales of Jewish Sudan. It's actually really, some of the stories on there are really riveting, and the history of Jews in Sudan. Hopefully we'll get to speak a little bit more about that. But I would like to ask you, what is it like to be a Middle Eastern Jew in the UK? Give us a little insight. What is that like?
Okay, so... so what is it like to be a Middle Eastern Jew in the UK? The Jewish community in the UK is predominantly Ashkenazi. Ashkenazi means from Eastern Europe, or Germany, basically East.
Okay.
So that's Ashkenazi. There's another... We separate Jews into Ashkenazi and Sephardi.
Okay.
Sephardi means from Spain, Sefarad. So Spanish and Portuguese Jews.
Okay.
And then into that comes Middle Eastern Jews.
Okay.
Because Middle Eastern Jews are pretty new to the UK. They came in the 50s and 60s.
So do you mind me asking questions? So when we use the word Sephardi, we're including Jews who are from the Middle East as well within that?
Yes,
even though
in the UK. So Jews from the Middle East would call themselves Sephardi.
Okay.
In the UK.
Okay, I see.
Because there wasn't a word for Middle Eastern Jews. In Israel now, there is a word for Middle Eastern Jews because there are more of them, and it's separated into different strands and different traditions. So in Israel, there is a word, but in the UK and the way that they see themselves, they say Sephardi.
Okay.
So there are definitely many, many more Ashkenazi Jews in the UK. The majority of the population is Ashkenazi. Jewish population is Ashkenazi.
Okay.
And they've been in the UK for a very long time. So from about 1800s with Russian pogroms, and that's kind of when the influx started of immigration to the UK and to the West. So Jewish culture in the UK is very Ashkenazi focused. So food, if you think of Jewish food, gefilte fish is probably a famous one. That's a very Ashkenazi thing. Like my family, I didn't even know what it was until I was about 16 and I started going to Jewish youth groups, because I also didn't grow up in a very Jewish area. So it was only when I was 16 that I started getting involved in the Jewish community as a whole, and really had to learn a lot. And that's the first time that I think I realized that I was a little bit different.
Yeah. No, I can imagine what that's like. And for a lot of Muslims in the UK, we often feel quite different, right? We feel like we're minority. I mean, we are minorities, of course, but we feel like we have that sort of extra burden to prove ourselves in certain ways, or to prove we belong to society. I mean, you know, we'll return more to this afterwards, but has that ever been an issue for you within the Jewish community and even within the community at large?
For me personally, it hasn't. I know some people do feel like that. I think most of it is actually just ignorance, and it's not ignorance from a bad place. It's just an assumption that you know the Yiddish words that they're saying to you. Or they'll pronounce, there's a lot of difference in pronunciation. So they'll just say something to you and you'll have to think for a second about what they actually mean before you respond. And it's not malicious in any way. It's just that's how it is. And there's no reason to, you know, to change. But no, I know some people do find it much more difficult.
Well, I think we're going to return to this afterwards, although I have like loads of different questions that have just like popped up in my head about, you know, being from the Middle East and being Jewish and then being in the UK. So when did the majority of like Middle Eastern Jews come to the UK, and why did they come?
Okay, so they mostly came in the 50s and 60s, and to talk about that is really to talk about the story of Jews in the Middle East as a whole. Up till that point. So I won't talk about Sudan for now because it's slightly different, but what I will do is focus on Egypt and Iraq because they're quite good snapshots of what life was like in the Middle East as a Jew. So Jews have been in the Middle East since biblical times, and if you're looking for historical evidence outside of biblical times, then there is evidence of Jews in Egypt from Elephantine papyri, which is like 500 BC, and Jews in Iraq as well from there's letters talking about the Jews, and again from 500 BC, something like that. So Jews have really been in the Middle East, and that's not talking about, you know, the Judea, Israel Peninsula. I'm talking about the rest of the Middle East. They've really been there forever.
And like what's interesting is if we're talking about, for instance, like, I mean, you know, Islam. There were Jewish communities in the city of Medina at the time of the Prophet. There were Jewish communities before then as well. The Yemeni Jewish community was really large, and there was even a Yemeni Jewish kingdom, right? So like, it does interest me to learn about that side of history that a lot of Muslims might not remember.
Yeah, so really there were Jews there from the very beginning throughout the Roman Empire, which, you know, definitely there's stories of, there's very well testamented evidence of Jews throughout the Middle East in the Roman Empire, throughout the Middle Ages. So they've always been there, and they've always had roots in these countries. So it's not like Jews came to these countries from somewhere. They were always there, and always quite a sizable part of the population. So in 1940 there were 850,000 Jews living in the Middle East and North Africa. And really, so if we say Islam came to the Middle East 600s-ish, around then.
Yeah.
Ish. Like, I'm not, like, you know.
No, of course.
Ish.
We usually use the benchmark of like 1400 years ago. So like.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know any. My maths isn't so good.
Okay. Really, the fate of the Jews and the Christians at the time depended on the ruler at the time and at the place. So it was never a very secure existence. It was always dependent on who was in charge and how nice they felt like being to you, basically.
You know, and that's interesting because a lot of Muslims, when they do talk about the history of the Middle East, they often talk about sort of, you know, how things were going really well, which is fair enough. And a lot of the time, if you do compare it to the Christian world at the time, things were much better, of course, you know, but not all the time. And there were times when things didn't go so well. And so it is interesting to hear more about that, you know. So you maybe elaborate on that a bit more if you can.
Okay, I'm just going to get my dates up because I don't want to get anything wrong. So if we look at... where are we? Sorry. Looking at Egypt, I can say, so we've got the Ottoman rule, for example.
Yeah.
Ottoman rule was generally okay. But then you've got in 1543, basically one of the Jews who becomes quite famous in the court, he becomes a bit too powerful and they just put him to death.
Okay.
So you've got 1641, Jews are doing really well. But then there's a trial against the Jews, again, basically becomes too powerful, and you know.
so it's always been about the sort of how the ruler viewed, because to me it's a question of control, right?
It's a question of control, and also it's a question of the other. So Jews are always seen as the other, and they're always seen as a threat in some ways. So if we're leaving aside, you know, the Middle Ages and the 1600s, and we skip forward to the Ottoman Empire, which is about 1880, a bit earlier, but 1880 at its peak.
Okay.
Jews are generally treated quite well, but again, there's like pogroms at random points. So there's a pogrom in Alexandria. There's an uprising in Iraq.
And what characterizes the reasons behind why these pogroms happen? Like, why do they happen because of anti-Semitism? Do they happen because, I mean, why do those pogroms happen?
Yeah, anti-Semitism. I mean,
it's obvious it's because of anti-Semitism. No, of course it's because of anti-Semitism. Is it driven by political developments as well?
Not necessarily. Okay. No, it
so they're random,
up and then they're random, and that's the thing, that you're living okay, and then it will flare up, and then it will go down, and everything's fine again.
Okay. It's interesting. I'm just trying to put it into the context of what, you know, the general political situations at the time. So what may have led people to be riled up against Jewish people? And it isn't, you know, a really important question to ask when we're looking at history, I guess, but I'm no expert. I have a lot to learn about this. So
if I talk about the more modern stuff, it makes it a little bit clearer.
Egypt and Iraq.
So Egypt gets independence Egypt and Iraq in the 1920s from the British Empire, and Iraq in the 1930s, I think. So they're both independent countries at that point. Jews don't get citizenship.
Okay.
In Egypt. I'm not sure about Iraq, but I don't think they do. So in Egypt, a lot of Jews stay British citizenships, which is important later on. Okay. So they also don't have, especially in Iraq, they're not allowed professional positions. So
wow.
They can be. There's one story of a man who his family are like traders, and you know, they do like, one of his father-in-law is a butcher. That kind of social level. And he gets an education, and he goes to work in the railways, which is a very prestigious position at that time.
Okay.
And he works himself up from, you know, the bottom, and he becomes station master. And then he realizes that actually he will never be able to progress or be promoted above station master as a Jew in 1940s Iraq. So he leaves and becomes a businessman. And that's actually the story of a lot of the Jews in Iraq and Egypt and the whole Middle East, is that they were mostly businessmen.
Okay.
Because they weren't allowed to have proper positions
Like
or posts, prestigious posts and positions. And a lot of them worked in banks as well, or accounting, because that's, again, one of the places that they were allowed to work.
I mean, if you don't mind me saying, a lot of people have these stereotypes about Jews, and it's worth learning, you know, if they have some truth to them, and but why things turned out like that. You know, it puts a lot of historical perspective to the ideas people have.
And when I say businessmen, not all of them are like big businessmen. I mean, some of them just own a little hole-in-the-wall shop, and that's their business.
Like, no, that makes sense.
It's not, you know, if you imagine the Middle East, you know, they have the shops, especially at that time, the shops are like hole-in-the-wall shops. Selling everything, you know, like everything shops, and that's what a lot of the Jews would have. So it's not that they were like making millions. They had their own businesses. When I say businessmen, some of them did very well, but not all of them did. And actually, anti-Semitism in the Middle East, in Iraq especially, is very dictated by your wealth. So if you're a very wealthy Jew, you are mixing with the high society of Egypt or Iraq. You're doing business with, you know, the politicians, with the military. You are having lovely parties every night, and you're not really experiencing any anti-Semitism. If you're a poor Jew living at the same time, living in essentially the ghettoized areas, very close to people who are maybe not as educated or quite resentful of the fact that you're a Jew, then you're not having a good time of it. And you can be attacked in the street at any point.
And this is like the reality in Egypt and Iraq.
Yeah, and the whole Middle East. I mean, the whole Middle East. Morocco, Tunisia, everywhere. So it's very dependent on lots of things, but it's not rosy all the time.
No, of course not. No, it is an idea that people have even of like pre-modern history, that you know, relations between the three religions were much better, or they were rosy and stuff. And to me, I don't know. To me, it's always depended on the politics, right? You know, what is going on, and like, you know, who's in power, how are they willing to treat different religions as well. Anti-Semitism and also like xenophobia in general exists in every society against minority faith. Exactly. So that's always going to be a reality. But when it really escalates, why does it escalate? That's, you know, we're not going to answer that question today.
Why did they leave?
No. Why did it escalate? Why does anti-Semitism or hate, xenophobia in general escalate to the extent of pogroms, to the extent of like, you know, mass murder? You know, that's obviously not a question we're going to be able to answer that easily today, but it is something for us to think about, you know, as we're going away. And I think I'm going to leave it here for the break. So, you know, we'll be back with you in a few minutes. Thanks for tuning in.
Or call us at 0208 472 5742. Al Akbar's, the name to remember.
Yo, bro! Cuzzy's getting married and I need to get hold of a car.
Yar, I know some boys who know SPM car hire. They got the best cars in town. Rolls Royces, Ranges, Maseratis, Aston Martins. Cuz, you name it, they got it. With the best prices in town.
Sorted! Looks like I'm going to this wedding in a Range then.
They'll drop off the car and pick you up once you're done. Just give them a ring on 01798 397 916 or visit them online spmhire.com or find them on Instagram.
Looking for meat and groceries? Look no further than Waris Food Store in Walthamstow. Visit the store to view our special Ramadan offers. 420 Hull Street, Walthamstow, E17 9AA. Or for free delivery, call us on 0208 521 0000. We have fresh deliveries of poultry and vegetables every day. Waris Food Store in Walthamstow.
Reliant Solicitors fight to protect your legal rights. Our firm offers a wide range of services including immigration, family law, commercial law, civil litigation, personal injury, landlord and tenant disputes and employment law. Visit us at 602A High Road, 7 Kings, Ilford, IG3 8BU or call 0207 183 5439. Reliant Solicitors, where every client matters.
Britain Solicitors in East Ham, the name you can trust. We provide services in immigration, family law, landlord and tenant matters, commercial leases and civil litigation. We also deal in personal injury claims and road traffic accidents. Call us on 0203 475 7845 or visit us at 62 Barking Road, East Ham, E6 3BP.
Ramadan FM 2018.
The voice of British Muslims.
Atlantic Distributions. Whether it is frozen fish, marinated Lahori masala fish or lamb offals, we have them available at very competitive prices. We are wholesale suppliers to restaurants, butchers and caterers. Visit us at 51 to 53 Upton Lane, London, E7 9PA. Contact us on 07415 474 185.
Usman needs the adhesive to work. If not, his day will be a disaster. So Usman, if you really need something to bond, grab a tube of CT1 from your local stockist, an incredibly powerful sealant and construction adhesive that's fast, flexible and strong. It can be used anywhere, even underwater. For more info, ct1limited.com or follow us on Facebook or ring us on 0208 555 1448.
In an age of technological advancement, mass communication and social media, having the right website and app can be the difference that your business needs. AppSite Tech are here to take your business to the next level. No matter how simple or how sophisticated your requirements are, our technicians will work with you to create a bespoke website and app for your organization. Call us now on 07538081212 or visit appsitetech.co.uk and book your free consultation now.
Amigos, the signature name when it comes to burgers and shakes. Our succulent burgers are prepared in front of you while you wait. Whether you go for the 6-ounce Mexican or the 10-ounce Texan, or you decide to go for a messy fries or buffalo wings, one thing you're guaranteed is quality. We've also got a range of desserts including our trademark shakes in all your favourite flavours. We're based at 400 Cranbrook Road in Gants Hill, so come down to dine in or order in on Uber Eats or Just Eat. Amigos, hats off to great burgers.
Ramadan FM 2018.
The voice of British Muslims.
Hey, तैनू 20 बारी आके तक क्रिकेट ना खेलिया कर तो फिर विंडो पंच हो रही है.
Don't worry, Dad. Our windows need changing anyway.
हाँ तो पैसे तू दे से ना.
Nah, don't worry, Dad. UK Windows will sort it out.
UK Window? Oh, कौन है?
They're the best double glazing company about. They do windows, patios, French doors, sliding doors, UPVC, aluminium, you name it, they've got it. We can go see them at 51 to 53 Upton Lane, Forest Gate, E79PA, or call them at 07984 440 093 or visit ukwindowslondon.co.uk.
वाह जी वाह, ये तो कमाल है यार. UK Windows
Zindabad.
Thinking about selling or letting your home? With Maxwell Estates, you don't need to look any further. Well established with over 15 years of experience, Maxwell Estates are specialists in residential.
Okay, assalamu alaikum to everybody. Again, I'm Zain. Thanks for tuning into Abrahamic Exchanges on Radio Ramadan. I'm with my amazing guest, Daisy Abboudi, who is talking about what it is like to be a Jewish person from the Middle East, a little bit about, actually a lot about Jewish life in the Middle East, historically speaking, and also today. And so from there, I kind of want to go on to asking you, Daisy, why did Jewish people immigrate to the UK? What drove them to immigrate? You know, because a lot of Muslims, especially from Pakistani backgrounds, you know, that you do have people who come as refugees, but by and large, people come here as economic migrants. So it would be interesting to compare that with sort of Middle Eastern Jewish people.
So most Middle Eastern Jewish people who came to the UK actually did come as refugees. Their anti-Semitism had reached a boiling point. From 1936 really onwards, when there were obviously Israel started, like the state of Israel as a thing started to become an issue. There was a lot of fighting before independence, so that kind of riled up the population. Then even before that, in Iraq in 1941. There was a big pogrom, they call it the Farhud, and it was a huge pogrom. Quite a few people died in Baghdad, and it was basically fueled by Nazism. So people think that Nazism didn't really affect Jews in the Middle East, and by and large it didn't. It did in Algeria, so the Nazis reached Algeria and Morocco as well.
Okay. Do you mind, sorry, like, just because you've really touched on a really interesting point, like, how did the Nazis reach these places?
Just as part of their campaign and
their
conquest.
So
they reached the border with Egypt, and they lost that battle against the British, and they lost. So they were very, very close to Egypt, and Iraq was very happy for Hitler to come and sort out their Jews.
Oh goodness!
It wasn't, there was. If he had succeeded, then it would have succeeded. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. It's not.
Okay.
They weren't protecting their Jews.
Yeah.
That hadn't really left. People were already starting to feel like it was maybe time to go, and if they could afford it, they started to leave a bit earlier. But for the most part, people were just waiting for things to get better. And then when in Israel gained independence, again, things flared up, but it wasn't maybe as dramatic as you might think in terms of impact on the Jews of the Middle East. What actually had the biggest impact was the idea of Pan-Arabism and Nasser.
Okay.
And if you didn't fit into this Pan-Arabic idea...
Do you mind explaining a bit, who is Nasser?
So Nasser of Egypt.
Okay.
The Prime Minister of Egypt, and he had this idea where he spearheaded the poster boy of this idea of a secular Pan-Arabism. So
what does that mean?
So it's the idea that all nations who speak Arabic, who are Arabic nations, should be one nation, and it would be a secular nation. And basically, if you didn't fit into that idea, if you weren't willing to shed your whole identity for this Arab ideal, then you weren't taken along with it. And on top of that, the main enemy for Pan-Arabism was Israel.
Yeah.
So it's for every movement there has to be an enemy.
Yeah,
a focal point against, and that became Israel for Pan-Arabism. So that really kicked off the biggest wave of anti-Semitism in the Middle East. And in Egypt in 1956, do you remember before I said that Egyptian Jews had British passports?
Yeah.
So they passed a law, they basically kicked out all British citizens. 1956, they had a week to leave.
Okay.
So that basically got rid of most of their Jews. I think a lot of their Jews left in 1956, and very quickly, like literally you've got a week to leave and that's it. They left all their property, everything. In Iraq, most Jews had left 1951.
Yeah.
And then their passports were frozen. So in the 1960s, there were like a few revolutions in Iraq, which I won't get into. Some were good, some were not good for the Jews. But 1967, you've got the 6-Day War with Israel. And that really is the final death knell for Jews in the Middle East. So in Sudan, for example, throughout the 50s, people had been leaving, but not very much. People were still waiting for things to get better. In the early 60s, 62, 63, a few left, those who could. But by 67, basically everyone left. And
Jews who came to the Middle East came around the 50s and 60s then.
So the ones who left, the last ones who left in 67.
So I meant the UK.
As a whole. I mean, I think it's something now like from 850,000 Jews. I think there's less than 1,000 Jews living in the Middle East now. And they didn't all come to the UK. Those who couldn't afford it went to Israel because they would just take them in. Switzerland, because they could get refugee status more easily in Switzerland if no one else could take them. Or America, a few went to America, and the rest came to the UK. So that's really why they came into the UK at that point. Some came with their property and money, and some came with nothing. Depends on the country and the situation and how lucky you were.
Okay, so like, you've given us a lot of historical context there, and I'm quite interested to bring it back to the domestic, the UK, Jews in the UK, Middle Eastern Jews in the UK. Like, I have a few questions that I'm asking just out of curiosity. People are welcome to call in. The studio number is 0333 011 6786. That is 0333 011 6786. I apologize for having forgotten to say this before. I was just really into the discussion and sort of listening to Daisy and talk about what it's like to be a Middle Eastern Jewish person and the history of of Jews in the Middle East. Now, coming back to the UK, Jews in the UK, what are the sort of biggest differences between like Middle Eastern Jews and Ashkenazi European Jews in terms of like religious practice, in terms of, Jewish life?
Okay, so I think the biggest difference is probably the way we pray. There are now Middle Eastern synagogues. Jews have set them up, but originally Jews from the Middle East would just go to Sephardi synagogues, which are Spanish and Portuguese-based liturgy. They're just different tunes, different pronunciations, a few festivals, we eat slightly different foods, maybe dress for more Orthodox, the way you cover your head might be different. So Middle Eastern Jews would more likely wear a scarf, whereas Ashkenazi Jews would more likely wear a wig. But they're quite slight in that way. I think you notice it more in terms of culture rather than religious practice.
Can you give me an example of what that might mean?
So like I said, the food, if you're joining, so for example, I'll give you a specific example.
Okay.
I used to go to a Jewish youth group, and obviously, like I said, most of the people there were Ashkenazi just by default. So there would be lots of discussions about the Holocaust. There'd be lots of discussions about the history of Jews in Russia. There'd be lots of discussions about Jewish culture in the UK, focusing on, again, Ashkenazi food or music. What you think of as Jewish music is actually Eastern European Jewish music. And there wouldn't be any mention at all of Jews in the Middle East, that they were there, anything about the culture.
And how did that make you feel?
You feel a bit like, oh, that's not very,
yeah.
You know, you just think, oh, okay. And that's kind of just how it is. But actually, it's really just my generation now who are starting to raise that point. Because I think I'm born here. My parents came here when they were young children. So my grandparents' generation were too busy making lives for themselves.
Okay.
Yeah, my parents' generations were fitting in as, you know, almost first generation immigrants. Their parents had come from somewhere very different and they'd grown up here and they were fitting in and making their lives as you know, and it's only my generation that actually are now settled here and feel confident, I think.
Because what you're really pointing at right now is something I'm seeing a really striking parallel with Muslim communities. So our parents at least are like, you know, they're the immigrants. They come here.
Yeah.
Their focus is sort of financial, getting yourselves organized, getting us into schools.
Yeah.
You know, that was what my mum focused on. That's what my dad focused on. But now, as young Muslims, we're beginning to question our identity because we have that sort of foundation. Most of us have a home to live in, most of us. And so it is interesting to see that parallel. It's interesting because, you know, Daisy actually works with me at the synagogue that I teach at. We do have these conversations as young people who are, you know, figuring out our identity as Muslims and Jews. So it is really interesting to hear about this.
Yeah, and I think we are now making moves, and I think there's a really interesting, you know, you spoke before about this idea that people have a very rosy picture of Jews in the Middle East, and I think actually a lot of that is down to the Jews from the Middle East, because there's this selective memory.
Yeah.
And you remember the great times, you remember sleeping under the stars, and you remember food, and I think that comes from having such a close culture that close community that they all had there. You would never be alone because you'd always be with, you know, your community, your friends, your Muslim neighbors, your Jewish neighbors. They remember the good because it's much nicer and easier to remember the good. And there's this very interesting, I read it, someone wrote it in a book and I just thought it was so perfect. It's a nostalgia for a place that you've never been to, that my generation of Middle Eastern Jews have. Mm-hmm. And that is very powerful, that you can have a nostalgia so strong that it lasts 3 generations. And I think we are now tapping into that. So Middle Eastern Jews are, or generally, more traditional than Ashkenazi Jews. And probably because they've been in more traditional countries for longer.
Yeah, so like the Jewish community, you know, by and large, you know, they sort of divide easily into like, not divide, but sort of split easily into like Orthodox, Reform, Liberal. How does that work in like Sephardi community?
Yeah, so most Middle Eastern Jews are traditional Orthodox. And whether they practice as much, they'll belong to an Orthodox. I grew up in an Orthodox synagogue because that's traditional. But now my generation are slowly moving away from that and creating, so now there are alternative like services for different people, and they've always followed an Ashkenazi liturgy, and now there's like amazing, actually an Iranian Jewish family who are my age, and she one of the women has learned how to read from the Torah in an Iranian style, which is really quite mind-blowing in terms of culturally. To do that is amazing, but that's actually happening now. So things are definitely changing and are becoming more inclusive, and I think we're just willing to shout more about it. Yeah. In Israel, it's very different. In Israel, Middle Eastern Jews were generally poorer and much lower status, and I think they've had to fight a lot harder for equality there. Yeah. Whereas here we don't have, we've got that baggage a bit, but not as much, and not in my generation.
Like I don't know, with a lot of Muslims, we have to face Islamophobia often. That's a huge problem in the media and in the way like geopolitics is portrayed. It often puts us in very vulnerable positions. I mean, Muslims in London are relatively lucky. But we also have to deal with, cases where, extreme Islamophobia outside of London as well, and even in London sometimes. And so But it is interesting to compare these experiences. There are parallels. There is this idea that now we are finding our identity as young Muslims in a cosmopolitan environment, you know, and also there are Muslims with alternative identities, you know, outside of the Orthodox as well. And so it is interesting to be hearing about this as well. I was going to ask you a question about, you know, the importance that your family or community might place in like preserving the tradition. But what I'm finding from what you're hearing is a lot of young people are doing that. So I think you've kind of answered that question already. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I think it does come from our grandparents, and
course.
the fact they were so important, and it mattered to them that that they kept their identity. You know, the food that we eat, and you know, little things, and they are the ones that gave that to us, because that could have very easily been lost.
Yeah.
But it wasn't, because it was so important to them, and that's why it's so important to us, I think, is a very important point.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to like a very, very short break, and then we're going to wrap up with some final comments.
Okay.
Okay.
Yar, I know some boys who know SPM car hire. They got the best cars in town. Rolls Royces, Ranges, Maseratis, Aston Martins. Cause you name it, they got it with the best prices in town.
Sorted! Looks like I'm going to this wedding in a Range then.
They'll drop off the car and pick you up once you're done. Just give them a ring on 01798 397 916 or visit them online spmhire.com or find them on Instagram.
Looking for meat and groceries? Look no further than Waris Food Store in Walthamstow. Visit the store to view our special Ramadan offers. 420 Hull Street, Walthamstow, E17 9AA. Or for free delivery, call us on 0208 521 0000. We have fresh deliveries of poultry and vegetables every day. Waris Food Store in Walthamstow.
Reliant Solicitors fight to protect your legal rights. Our firm offers a wide range of services including immigration, family law, commercial law, civil litigation, personal injury, landlord and tenant disputes and employment law. Visit us at 602A High Road, 7 Kings, Ilford, IG3 8BU or call 0207 183 5439. Reliant Solicitors, where every client matters.
Britain Solicitors in East Ham, the name you can trust. We provide services in immigration, family law, landlord and tenant matters, commercial leases and civil litigation. We also deal in personal injury claims and road traffic accidents. Call us on 0203 475 7845 or visit us at 62 Barking Road, East Ham, E6 3BP.
Ramadan FM 2018.
The voice of British Muslims.
Atlantic Distributions. Whether it is frozen fish, marinated Lahori masala fish or lamb offals, we have them available at very competitive prices. We are wholesale suppliers to restaurants, butchers and caterers. Visit us at 51 to 53 Upton Lane, London, E7 9PA. Contact us on 07415 474 185.
Usman needs the adhesive to work. If not, his day will be a disaster. Ah! So, Usman, if you really need something to bond, grab a tube of CT1 from your local stockist. An incredibly powerful sealant and construction adhesive that's fast, flexible and strong. It can be used anywhere, even underwater. For more info, ct1limited.com or follow us on Facebook or ring us on 0208 555 1448.
In an age of technological advancement, mass communication and social media, having the right website and app can be the difference that your business needs. AppSite Tech are here to take your business to the next level. No matter how simple or how sophisticated your requirements are, our technicians will work with you to create a bespoke website and app for you.
Okay, assalamu alaikum to everybody tuning in. This is Abrahamic Exchanges with your host, Zain Hussain. We're going to wrap up. I'm with my guest, Daisy Abboudi, who was telling us about what it's like to be a Jewish person from the Middle East in the UK, and also about the history of Jews in the Middle East and how they came and how Middle Eastern Jews came to the UK, the challenges they faced. But also, we also spoke before the break about how younger Jews from the Middle East, and we compared it to how young Muslims are doing a similar thing within their communities, either reinventing or rediscovering their identities as Muslims and Jews. I've mentioned this already, but I work with Daisy as a Hebrew teacher at the Wimbledon Synagogue. And ever since I started working there, I've always seen it as like an opportunity to have interesting discussions with people there about being Muslims and Jews, about being minorities in the UK, and comparing our experiences. Recently, there was a student exchange that was organized by the teachers from both centres.
Organised by Zain.
Organised by me most... Okay, but couldn't have done it without Daisy's help, and also the help of like the teachers who were involved, between the synagogue and our idara. And I kind of wanted to, because I've not really asked you properly, what was that like for you coming to the mosque? Have you been to many mosques here?
I've not ever been to a mosque in the UK, so I've been to mosques like travelling.
Yeah.
As a tourist, but not in the UK. And I loved it. I mean, I thought it was great. I learned loads. And I think what was so nice, especially, I mean, as teachers, we had like a little opportunity to speak to each other, but not as much as probably we all would have liked, just because we were looking after the kids. One of the best moments of, it made it all worthwhile was towards the end of, so first the mosque children came to us, and then we came to the mosque.
Yeah.
And the way that we did it was we did like a program each, and then we ate lunch together.
Yeah.
And at the mosque, so they'd had 2 sessions together, and the teachers were preparing lunch, and there was a group of kids sitting down, of mosque and Jewish kids sitting down and chatting, and they were not having a polite chat. It was a proper conversation with giggling and laughing, and you could see that they were actually connected, and it was a real conversation about, I've no idea what it was about, but I just thought that was such a lovely moment, and that just made the whole thing worthwhile, because I just thought that's what's so important. And yes, it's really important to talk about. I mean, they were young. If we did it with older,
they're not going to talk about the things we're talking about now.
No, and also if we did it with older kids, okay, I think interfaith is really important to address the more difficult issues, but which we didn't do because they were 12 years old.
Yeah.
But that's how it starts, and that's how you come to a place of understanding, and that for me was just the best moment.
I mean, like, talking about myself a little bit, that was a process for me as well. It took me 4 years of studying Arabic and studying Hebrew, really delving into like Hebrew as a language and Judaism as a faith. Maybe not as much as I wanted to, but I did do it to the extent that I could. Actually living in Israel, Palestine, living in Jerusalem, meeting people. I also learned a little bit more about the Israel-Palestine conflict. But it did, without going into too much detail, because we have not got time to do that right now. We have like 3 minutes. What it did open up to me was the importance of speaking about these things.
Yeah.
And so when I did come back to the UK and I became a Hebrew teacher because I needed a Sunday job more than anything, it became an opportunity to discover, to learn more about Judaism as well. And so it's been a process for me too. I wouldn't be here speaking to you or even know you if I didn't go through that process, and if you didn't go through a process of knowing me.
Yeah.
It's a process for both of us. And I do want to leave with one question though, and it might be a bit of an odd question, so you don't have to answer it, but does being a Jewish person who is Middle Eastern, does that create some sort of advantage or some sort of unique vantage point of interfaith dialogue with Muslims? Sort of both ways, because Jews from the Middle East obviously come from the Muslim world, and so what is it like? Does that give you any different sort of sense when you're in a Muslim space?
I'll talk about Sudan, because
Yeah.
I haven't really spoken about it that much. And
Okay.
Sudan was
2 minutes.
actually, No, Sudan was actually, if you were going to live anywhere in the Middle East as Jews, Sudan was a good place to be.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, there was anti-Semitism, but it wasn't to the level of the rest of the Middle East for the most of it.
Yeah.
And I think what it gives you growing up with those stories is a sense that it can be done, and it can be done nicely and well. My grandparents would, break Ramadan with their Muslim neighbors. Their neighbors would help them cook matzah on Passover. It was a really cohabiting lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think it can be done, and there's no reason why it can't. That was after Israel was created. That's not the issue. In terms of dialogue and interfaith work.
Sort of talking in terms of like Israel. You mentioned Israel, because I lived there. I lived in Jerusalem, and being a brown Muslim there is difficult as hell. So you can face a lot of racism, but there are also people who are very open-minded, willing to have these conversations very openly. And I wish I had the time to go through more, and I wish I could ask you so many more questions. But thanks for coming. It was
having me.
It was really amazing to learn about the experience of Jews from Sudan, Jews from the Middle East, and that's a very important perspective that we might miss sometimes when we're talking about the history of Muslims and the other, and also relate it to our experiences as minority Muslims in this country as well. There's no reason why we can't do that. Me and Daisy both belong to a generation of Muslims and Jews who are reinventing and rethinking their identities as young Muslims and Jews. And sort of, I invite everyone, and I'm sure you do the same, to do the same. Really think about who you are in this context. And it doesn't have to be negative. It can be really positive as well. So thanks for tuning in, guys. I just wanted to leave you with that message. Thank you for coming again.
Thank you for having me.
And assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.